Greetings, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and welcome to or welcome back to the channel. My name's Ren, and today we are diving into the first. So, if you saw the title, you know what we're talking about. If you didn't, welcome. So, for anyone not familiar with me and what I do and my background, hi, my name's Rin. I have a background in anthropology and ethnobotany, so essentially the merge point between anthropology and archaeology and stuff, and botany. TLDR, how people work with plants, how people interact with, how people use plants in various capacities. And in this particular situation, right, we're talking about supernatural. And apologies if the mic is picking up ambient noises, the dryer's going a little bit. But we're talking about Supernatural, the show. And again, if you hear pages flipping, I've got my notebook of notes and stuff. Now, I'm, just full disclosure here, I am firmly in the camp of people who are both a fan of the show, because we're talking about Supernatural here, so fan of the show, and also highly critical of the show, or well, fan of the characters, and that's a whole other thing. If you've seen any of the live streams, mostly through book club streams, honestly, but if you've seen any of those or the recordings, when fandom is mentioned at all, you might remember that I tend to come into a fandom from the fandom, like from the fan fiction and fan art and stuff. So, just as a thing going forward, as we get more into this as a series, just, that's something to be aware of. There are certain things that we will eventually be discussing, probably, we'll say, that I'm not, like, part of the fandom. I've just seen the thing or read the thing, whatever it is. This particular, like, I am part of the fandom, have been for a number of years, while also recognizing that there's some highly problematic elements to that. So, with that, it's kind of a known thing, I would imagine, that Supernatural as a show has a tendency to misrepresent a lot of cultural information, specifically indigenous spiritual practice from the world over. Lot focusing on Native American, though. So, there's that. I don't have the cultural or educational background to feel comfortable commenting on that. unless it's in a capacity of, like, referencing commentary or supporting commentary in discussion with someone from an indigenous community, indigenous people themselves. So, well, a lot of episodes have something to deal with Native American, indigenous cultural practice. Just be aware that that's probably not going to be a thing that I talk about, unless, of course, someone wants to come on eventually and we just have a chat about it. Just putting that out there. That said, I feel comfortable talking about, like, European cultural practice that is represented, and a derivative practice that is represented and stuff. For this particular episode that we're gonna get to in a bit, just disclaimers and things and whatnot and all of that. In addition, I did my dissertation on botanical use in contemporary British pagan ritual practice. So just be aware of, like, that's my bias, essentially. Which is a thing that ideally should be noted when someone is going into a discussion that is at least tangentially academic. I've got however many pages I ended up writing out. Ordinarily it would be in a Google Doc, but the phone is currently recording this because my camera doesn't have a mic jack. And I don't have a hot shoe mic at this point. And, video recorded on the camera without an external mic will be uploaded after this. The audio's not the best. Just gonna say that right now. So, be aware. I'm not part of the contemporary Norse pagan community. I am part of a Celtic-based pagan community. So, and there's some overlap, and there's interaction that I've had with that. So again, I feel comfortable talking about this, and by this, it's certain elements of Norse paganism that have been commandeered, adapted, however you want to phrase it, for use in media. I follow a branch of Celtic paganism, not Norse, but I'm familiar with particular elements and components of said practice. And again, as with any group, really, any categorization, there's a lot of diversity, so anything that I'm saying in this isn't a universal. A lot of traditional pagan practices highly localized to a particular region or a particular community in a region. Sometimes particular towns have their own like subsets of practice. Case in point, the town involved in this particular episode. So, and again, just heads up that going forward, unless I have access to statements from, or like actual discussion, ideally, with those from within particular indigenous communities, because I don't have the base knowledge or cultural base to pull from, and don't want to speak over indigenous voices or share incorrect or protected information. I just won't talk about it unless it's just a very general note that something exists. Like, in a particular scene, there is a reference to X, and moving on. But again, with that, there are going to be certain, not in this episode, but there are going to be certain terms that I will not say. I'll just talk around it if it's a necessary thing, because from what I've heard from people in the community that it's in reference to, the term itself is not something that is said. So, anyway, moving on to this particular episode. I'm going to try and cut it down. We're at 14 minutes now. So, let's begin. Firstly, I realized on the rewatch that this is taking place mid-April. So, like, the second week of April. About halfway between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. Not, as I had thought, in autumn, which is why I started doing the research for this one and focused in on the Scarecrow episode. Because A, Scarecrow, B, they have an apple orchard, and we'll get to that in a second, and C, ritual elements and stuff. Now, if you look at particular scenes, and if it doesn't get a copyright claim, I'll have footage from the episode kind of spliced in here periodically. But what was I saying? So, yeah, basically I was thrown off by the prevalence of apples and apple discussions and imagery and whatever for the entire duration of the episode, and particular disregard for certain customs and things. But again, we'll get to that in a little bit. So, just going on the assumption that the historical and cultural accuracy is lacking kind of across the board, just as it is with pretty much, with very few exceptions, basically all of the episodes have some kind of inaccuracy, which, just, if you haven't seen the show, know that going in. But I'm going on the assumption, based on other markers in the show, or in the episode, that the second week of April, quote unquote, is meant to represent Beltane, or Beltane, or, I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong because I always do, Walpurgis night, or Walpurgis Nacht? Walpurgis Nacht, I think. Apologies if that was completely inaccurate, but I tried. So, as we go through, we'll walk through the episode and discuss the accuracy of events mentioned kind of as we go. So, Supernatural Season 1, Episode 11, aka Scarecrow, opens with a newly married man and woman, newly married couple, thanking a town somewhere for their hospitality and repairing their car that had broken down, or repairing, again, quote unquote, their car that they had been told would break down imminently. And the apple pie that they just eaten. Which, I realize that at this point in history, like in the current era, apples are pretty accessible, pretty common year-round at this point. But it's still very much kind of a seasonal fruit and stuff. And I get if something is filmed during a particular season and then airs during another season. But this is meant to take place in April, and apples are harvested in the fall, generally. Like, the main, it depends on location and environmental conditions and the variety, but July to December is the apple season. And if you get them out of season, they don't quite taste right. And we'll get to that in a little bit, too. At least in the Northern Hemisphere. It's opposite for the Southern Hemisphere. So, unless they're somehow in Australia for this, which would put, April as a... Even then, no, April, well, yeah, it would, because that would, the seasons are inverted, so, yeah, if we're suddenly in a part of Indiana that is also in Australia with inverted seasons, then a bumper crop of apples in April totally makes sense. So, with that, there will be a nod to later discussions of the being inhabiting the Scarecrow ensuring a good harvest, but in all the records that I've seen, a community being blessed by good fortune still operates within the confines of the seasons, regardless of what kind of boon is present. There might be a longer growing season, but unless there's direct involvement by like the Fae or certain otherworldly beings, which we'll get to in a second, there's always distinct seasons, and even then there's distinct seasons. It's just the less hospitable might be shorter, or the climate might be more even than it would otherwise. It's usually when seasons of growth, life, death, and rebirth aren't abided by that problems tend to arise. The main examples that I can think of in general pop culture being the whole thing with zombies and vampires and whatnot, because, they won't die. So, yeah. It's usually when seasons of growth, life, death, and rebirth aren't abided by that problems tend to arise. The main examples that I can think of in general pop culture being the whole thing with zombies and vampires and whatnot, because, they won't die. Unless there's very particular situations enacted. So getting back to the storyline, we've got a couple going through what we learn is rural Indiana, and they've been told to take a few turns, go down Orchard Road, in order to get back to the interstate. They turn down the road, the car breaks down in an orchard, and they, like pretty much all intro characters in a horror movie, get out of the car and go to get help in the middle of the night in an unknown area before being hunted down by said aforementioned Scarecrow. As you do. So, yeah. Okay, it was a cat hair. Alright. Lex, you getting hair everywhere. Anyway. Moving on. So, then the scene cuts to a year later, when Sam and Dean, the, at this point, main characters, are waking up to a call from their dad. Now, at this point in the supernatural storyline, Sam and Dean are hunting the monster of the week, and their dad, John, is still intentionally disappearing whenever they happen to show up somewhere. Because reasons. And is hunting the demon that killed their mom back when Dean was 4 and Sam was 6 months old. Just in case that's a thing that you're not aware of. And yeah, that little bit isn't a spoiler exactly, because it's in the first episode. The first 5 minutes of the first episode, so there you go. Yeah. So they wake up to a call from John, sending them to check out a stretch of road and a series of towns in Indiana, where every year a heterosexual couple, it's such a foreign concept that I have a hard time saying it sometimes, Anyway. So every year a heterosexual... I can do the thing. Straight. There we go. Every year, a heterosexual couple goes missing on a particular stretch of road in the second week of April, which, admittedly, for once in the supernatural universe, is kind of a point for the gays, I guess. Maybe tangentially, in a very roundabout fashion. Now, slight diversion from the storyline for a second. Unless there's a very particular practice that's being referenced that I'm not aware of, again, best I can track, this is in reference to, or inspired by, I guess would be a better way to say it, Beltane, or Beeltana, or Mayday, or... what was the Germanic one? Walpurgis Night. Which, being called Mayday, you might deduce, happens the last day of April, the first day of May. It's one of those sundown to sundown situations. Alright, so, just a heads up. This next little section, well, it is likely practiced in some capacity by contemporary people. What I'm speaking of in this is historical, based on whatever records and folk practice that we know of that has existed, that is still present in awareness and stuff, essentially. And there are a lot of other components to Beltane, but for the purposes of this particular analysis, this is the section that is relevant to a comparison of the media presented material. So you know going in. It's a very multifaceted holiday, just all of them are. And there's a lot that can and often does potentially go into the celebration, the honoring, however it presents as you're doing stuff. But again, for the purposes of this, it's semi-one-dimensional. Just there's that. Now, in a lot of accounts, and again, different regions, different enclaves, I guess, have different practices associated, different traditions associated with how they celebrate particular things. But in a lot of accounts of Beltane, if you go back far enough, unwed marriage-age people would go off into the forest and run around a bit till one person caught, quote unquote, another, and they'd have their fun and go home. Some couples stayed together after that. Some were likely together beforehand and just agreed to meet up at a particular tree or something. And for others, a relationship wasn't pursued after. It was just a thing in the forest. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of a situation, and move on. In some accounts, participants wearing masks is mentioned, in others it's not. Again, diversity of storytelling and regional practice. And if a Beltane union resulted in a child being born, it was often seen as a blessing, further emphasizing the fertility of the land and her people. Because at its base, it's a fertility ritual, fertility rite. And so there's more, but that's the short version that's potentially being referenced in this. And we might end up getting more into it in the future, but for the purposes of this particular video, there's that. And I'll have some links and stuff down in the description below for anything that's referenced. So, as previously stated, this chosen couple goes missing and is never seen or heard from again. Cars disappear. It's just the people fell off the face of the earth. There's no record of them past the point of visiting a particular region. They just disappear. And the explanation we get when Dean goes to investigate ends up being that the creepy scarecrow that sits in the town's apple orchard is somehow a composite of the remains of different people who have gone missing. So yeah, in this particular episode, it's where we get such gems from Dean particularly, like...
Dude, you fugly.
It's not one of the quip-rich episodes exactly, but that was one at least. And upon talking to a local anthropologist, I believe he was, one of the professors at the local college, he determines that a Vanner has possessed the Scarecrow to consume human sacrifices. So, this is your warning going forward, because we're going to be talking about that for a little bit. Just so you know. So, two things, right? Firstly, while there are records of human sacrifice in the region, and there is historical account of a mock sacrifice at Beltane, no archaeological or historical records exist of human sacrifice being carried out in conjunction with this time of year in Northern Europe. Aside from Roman writings talking about how strange the others that they wrote about were, and had mentions of large platforms on which humans could be burned. Thus further othering the locals, you know. This is also where we get the inspiration for the Wicker Man film. Both of them. So, secondly, massively simplifying the Norse theological structure. We've got two pantheons, essentially. The Aesir and the Vanir. And again, apologies if the pronunciation is incorrect. That's the best I got. From what I've heard, sometimes they intermingle, sometimes they don't. Most of the time they get along relatively well, but at one point the two tribes had an epic war in which the Aesir fought with just plain combat, like weapons and brute strength, essentially. And the Vanir used magic. So, based on that, we've got like a more physical approach to battle, and a more like maybe not psychological, but like a slightly amorphous approach to battle, you know. They eventually called a truce and exchanged hostages, as was the custom at the time, to ensure peace. All that to say that, well, sacrifice was most definitely a thing. The majority of human sacrifice was A, not associated with this time of year, really, and B, at least there's a little bit of a gray area, because there's possible instances where prior to it being a mock sacrifice, as it were, it was an acted sacrifice, but there's been no archaeological evidence to support that. So it's a potential theory, but lacking data at this point. So, getting back to this. Sacrifice was most definitely a thing. But the majority of human sacrifice was dedicated to and accepted by Odin, the head of the Aesir, while the Vanir tended to accept animal sacrifice. And so we've got an unnamed Vanir temporarily inhabiting a scarecrow made of rotting corpse bits that lives in or is otherwise tied to an old apple tree that was somehow brought over from the old world with a particular set of symbols carved into the surface, because like in one of the last shots of the episode we see a close-up of a carving on the surface of the tree, and destroying the tree destroys the Vanir associated with it and reverses any blessing granted by said being. And we know that last bit because there's mention of the trees already starting to die after Dean rescues a couple from becoming sacrifices in the orchard. In the time period that they're there. Further on that, the only mention that I've heard of a particular like home tree a being is connected to are the dryads, who inhabit particular trees. And yes, I realize that I'm mixing tenses like all throughout this. Certain practices are still acknowledged and honored and are still kind of in play, and others aren't as much. And also, like, there's the literary approach of characters, and there's the cultural and historical approach of, like, deity. And it all kind of, I'm trying to keep it straight, but it all kind of mixes together when I talk about stuff sometimes, so just as a thing. The only instance that I've seen of a particular home tree being connected to a particular being is with the dryads who inhabit particular trees, which the Vanir aren't. Likewise, the only member of either the Aesir or the Vanir associated with apples is Idun, or Iduna, who's the goddess of spring and rejuvenation, and is the wife of Bragi, the god of poetry. And to quote Britannica, she was the keeper of the magic apples of immortality, which the gods must eat to preserve their youth. Which is likely, at least tangentially, a component in this. Meanwhile, in addition to... okay. PSA, kids, if you're writing something that you're gonna then use to reference something when having a discussion about whatever the topic is, make sure you can actually read your handwriting, because that's important. Moving on. So, meanwhile, in addition to the Monster of the Week, we have the subplot of Dean just trying to keep his family together. Sam basically fully embracing his dad's fanaticism, at least in certain times, and John being a cryptic voice on the other end of the phone, like he is for the majority of his appearances in here. This is also the first meeting that we have with Meg, who, based on her using blood to, quote, make a call, is probably a demon. Spoiler alert, she's definitely a demon. Definitely, just putting that out there. If you haven't seen later episodes of the show, she's definitely a demon. And, where we see just how kind of paternal Dean is with Sam. So, Sam shows up to rescue his brother, who's, like, tied to a tree in an orchard, because he and Emily, who is the niece of the people who run the inn/gas station, and are the ones who direct people to the orchard, has been chosen to be the sacrifice, because the original sacrifices, the original people who would have been the sacrifices, were saved and ran off. So we've got Dean and Emily tied to trees in the forest. Orchard. There we go. So Sam shows up to rescue his brother, and on hearing that Sam stole a car, Dean says, quote, "That's my boy."
How'd you get here? I stole a car. That's my boy.
And the only other people who get away with that, the only other people who, like, voice that as a thing, from what I remember in the entire duration of the 15-year run of the show, are Bobby and John. So they're adopted and biological fathers, respectively. Additionally, while apples are mentioned throughout certain aspects of mythology for their associated wisdom, longevity, and use in marriage proposals, the only way that I could see there being any apples on the trees in April is if there's some extra super funkiness happening. So figure out what was going down. Like, if they had filmed it in autumn and just said that it was April or what have you. Also looks relatively cold in that point. But yeah, so I looked up some episode trivia, and this, along with everything else, again, is going to be linked down below. But the idea of immigrants, in this case Scandinavian immigrants, bringing their old world gods with them, like physically with them, not just like an amorphous idea, but like physically bringing them with them to a new land, might be a reference to Neil Gaiman's novel American Gods, as Kripke, one of the showrunners, has said that he's a fan of Gaiman's work, which would also explain why it's in there. Who knows? Also, the episode is supposed to have taken place in Burkittsville, Indiana, And while the other towns mentioned, like Scottsburg and Salem, are real, Burkittsville is not. It's a fictional town. However, Burkittsville, Maryland is a real village where the Blair Witch Project is supposed to have taken place. And Eduardo Sanchez, who's one of the film's creators, later went on to direct 5 of the Supernatural episodes. Okay. Now, for the botany nerd trivia time here. The apple trees depicted in the episode are actually hazelnut trees. No apples were actually seen, and it threw me off when I was trying to figure out what was going down, and once it registered that this was April and stuff, because every shot of the orchard has baskets filled with apples, but you never see anyone harvesting the apples. Oh. You don't see anyone harvesting the apples because the people are the harvest. Ah, okay, yeah. Gotcha. That's fun times. Anyway, yeah. So you never see anyone picking apples, which would make sense because there aren't any at that point, likely. I mean, the episode aired in January, so it would have had to have been filmed at least a couple of months in advance, probably. So, yeah, I tried to figure out when it was filmed and couldn't. So, if you have that info, if you're aware of that, leave it in a comment down below. I'd be interested to see that particular bit of info. But on top of that, almost all the shots of the orchard are like dark and kind of disorienting, with a lot of like mist and stuff. So you wouldn't be paying attention to the state of the trees much anyway, really, aside from the last couple of scenes in the orchard with like the sun having risen and them walking through. And so the trees weren't really the main focus. The people and the action sequences with the people, because the stabby and the Scarecrow trying to eat people was the thing. So there's that. A quick note from editing Rin here. I just realized that I hadn't specified why, like blatantly, why it's a man and woman who keep getting taken because it's a fertility thing. There we go. I will say though that even though it's a fertility rite, a fertility festival, depending on the scale that you're operating on, it's also the fertility of ideas and concepts and projects and things. But for this particular, it's fertility of the land and the people on said land and whatnot, hence male and female contributions to that end. Just putting that in there. So yeah, anyway, back to the rest of the video. Bye. Also, as a break from editing shenanigans, the floof in her natural habitat has been spotted. Hey, Lex. How you doing, baby? How you doing? Okay, I'll let you get back to sleep. There you go. Alright, that's all. Just as a follow-up thing here, Editor Ren popping in. Well, we'll doing other stuff. In addition to everything else, the apple was seen as one of the potential, like, trees of life in certain areas. In addition to, like, depending on the culture, apple was kind of synonymous with every fruit option. That's why it's the pomegranate. The palm is apple. That sort of thing. So, something to be aware of. And hazelnut is associated with wisdom and insight and that sort of thing. So, there's that. Also, it's seen as, like, a liminal space between, like, the physical world, so, like, between humanity and the spiritual world, kind of. So it's a bridge between people and deity, which, if they're using the hazel as a stand-in for an apple tree that is the home of one of the Vanir in the storyline, that works. I haven't seen anything talking about why that choice was made, or why not just use an apple grove, aside from, like, maybe they couldn't source an apple grove for the shoot, because neither of the plants are in flower or, like, in fruit in the middle of, like, April or January when the episode first aired. So, make of that what you will. Yeah. So there we go. And back to the rest of the video. So, my phone's at like 5% battery at this point, so we're wrapping it up. So what have we learned? Set design is fascinating, which it is. Yeah, that's going to be a thing that gets brought up repeatedly, regardless of what the show, piece of media, whatever is that's being commented on. Set design is fabulous and fascinating. Though it does help when the storyline matches what, you know, the reality, where it's supposed to. Fun fact, tossing someone an apple was an old school marriage proposal. And, like, if they caught it, then that was, like, accepting the marriage proposal. So, there's that. Specifically, a man tossing an apple to a woman because heteronormativity and history and stuff. But there we go. And cultural and historical accuracy and continuity is often piecemeal at best when talking about well-known media using said references. So, there we go. Hopefully that was of some interest, some potential use to any and all who are watching this. Thank you very much for hanging out. Been recording for about an hour now, so we'll see how long the actual video ends up. And I will see you all later. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more content. I'm trying to get more into actually editing stuff. So, yeah. I'm trying to do at least 2 Plants and Pop Culture episodes a month. Ideally once a week. We'll see. But the next one is going to be talking about the Halloween episode. Again, from Supernatural. Season 4? Yeah, season 4, because it's the first season that Cass is in the show. So, there's that. Yeah, stay tuned for that and everything. Botany Book Club is Thursdays at 3. Links, as always, are down below, along with all the references. I will see you all later. Thank you so much for hanging out and being awesome. Till next time. Bye, everybody. Random. Really? There's a hair that's just decided to be a pain right there. Okay. Sir, can you not